next up, we have two very special guests. And if you have ever built anything on Bubble, and chances are that you did run into one or two situations where you weren't quite sure of how do you solve a particular problem. And then you are probably guaranteed to stumble upon the great tutorials, videos, and walkthroughs of how do you solve practically most, if not all, of the issues that people are just getting started working on Bubble and overall in no-code world are facing. I'm talking about people whose Bubble karma is so high up that you can probably never reach that level because it keeps adding and adding to itself every day. So legendary Gaby and Kristen from Building No-Code Apps. It's amazing to have you here. It's always a pleasure. So what do you have to tell us today, and what we can share from the legends of no-code, and how can we add value to people in the conference? What do you got for us?
Well, thank you so much for having us, Vlad. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we'll dive right in. Okay. All right.
Looks good.
Okay, great. So thank you, first off, for everyone joining in today. And thank you, Vlad, and of course, Levon and the rest of the Zeroqode team for having us. We are so excited to be talking with you about how to start your app-based business without a technical background. Now, there has been a massive shift in the no-code space. And with the availability of so many different tools and platforms today, there has also been a massive shift in the types of businesses that non-technical entrepreneurs are able to launch and grow quickly. Now, before we dive into all of that, first, I want to introduce ourselves. My name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No-Code Apps alongside Gaby. And we help business owners and industry experts build custom apps to start their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses, all without coding and with no technical background required. Now, much like the ability to start an online business has been democratized in a lot of ways for non-technical people, we're on a mission to do the same, but for app-based businesses. Now, I don't personally have a technical background, but because of the no-code space, I've been able to guide the growth of a software development company, which is pretty cool to say.
And I'm Gaby Roman, the other co-founder of Coaching No-Code Apps, and I don't have a technical background either. That said, we've now helped thousands of non-technical entrepreneurs build highly customized, fully functional, and scalable applications that they're able to grow into reliable businesses or use to help their existing businesses grow and scale even further. Not only that, we've also been able to create customized applications and back-end processes for our own business. And those applications have enabled us to operate in an incredibly lean and profitable way. And many of our clients are looking for the same.
So let's dive in. Today, we're talking about how to start your app-based business without coding and without any technical background required. Now, in this discussion, we're going to cover both the strategic and the technical aspects of achieving this. And I'm going to be covering the strategy, and Gaby is going to be covering the tech components. Now, keep in mind, there is a lot involved in creating, launching, and growing an app-based business, but we're going to cover as much here today as we can. So I like to think about app-based business development as having 5 main stages. Now, as we go through these, I want you to put yourself through these stages as well. And we're going to talk about how you can move through them correctly and effectively. So first, you have your idea, the thing you've come up with and envisioned that you now want to package up into an application. Now, this is over here on the left. And then on the far right, you have your scale stage. At this point, you have the thing you are currently dreaming up and pushing toward, your actual app-based business. And this is the stage in which you're now ramping it up. You're growing your revenue, and at this point, you're actually running a fully fledged business. Now, the question is how to get from the left to the right. And on top of that, how do you get to the other side? in a way so that once you're there, you can remain in the scale stage from there on out versus having to backtrack. Now, the reality is it's really common for people to try to skip all the stages in between and jump straight into the point of trying to scale their businesses, which can lead to a lot of setbacks. And many people feel like, since they're in the no-code space, they should be able to crank out overnight successes one after the other. But to skip the stages in between means you'll likely run into a lot of issues down the road, issues with scalability and the performance of your app. Things will feel disjointed and broken. You'll have trouble testing and getting user feedback because you have to do those things in very specific ways at the right time and in the right order. And really the list of consequences could go on, but we want to help you avoid all that. So to do so, the first thing you need to do is break down your idea. Now, I want you to do a quick gut check. Did you come up with your app idea because you were maybe going about your regular day-to-day routine and suddenly something you did sparked a cool idea? Now, if so, this is really common, but here's the thing. You have to make sure that your idea is not just an idea, and instead, it's actually a solution. Now, ideas can be successful, but it's vastly easier to find success if you're building a solution. This really involves you reframing the way you're thinking about your app and your business. So you need to be solving some sort of problem that some market needs to have solved. So I want you to ask yourself right now, what is the specific problem that your app or your app idea solves? So let's say you have identified the specific problem. So I now want you to take it a step further. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I want you to think about your app as being made up of a combination of your 3 answers to these questions. Number 1, does your target market have a problem they need to solve? This goes back to what we just talked about. Are you solving a problem? But more importantly, does a market or a segment of a market actually want and need to solve that problem? And number 2, what do you bring to the table? In other words, why are you the one building this app? This is just as important to consider because sometimes you might have an idea for something you really shouldn't be building, maybe at least not yet. So what makes you knowledgeable about this? And lastly, what gaps in the market are you filling? Now think about it this way. There are likely existing solutions for the problem you're solving, even if they don't come in the form of an application. Maybe the existing solution is a spreadsheet, or maybe even it's just pen and paper. So ask yourself what those solutions aren't currently providing. So what I want you to do is make sure your app is made up of the answers to those 3 questions. Now, remember that we're still in the idea stage right now, and you really don't want to move on to the next stage until you're confident with this. But if you do this, all your next steps will be infinitely easier. So the next stage is validation. You have your idea, or rather your solution, and now you need to make sure it's a valid solution. And to be clear, not everybody will go through this validation stage in the exact same way. There are really 2 main categories that we can lump application founders into. In one category, we have a group of people who have a lot of really good ideas, but they don't necessarily know the severity of the problem they're solving quite yet, or they might not have in-depth knowledge in their target market quite yet, or they may not even have any experience within the industry their app is for. In other words, they have an idea, but they don't really know whether people will need or use it yet because they lack that knowledge and experience to determine that. And then we have the other category. And this is actually where most of the clients who we work with fall into. And in this category, we have people who are building a solution that will serve an industry or a market in which they are experts in some way. So maybe they're building an app that handles processes they deal with in their own careers, or maybe they're building an app to solve a problem they experience day in and out in their jobs or their businesses or their lives. And they might even be building an application for their own business, or maybe even packaging that app up and selling it to other businesses like theirs down the road. So, in other words, they're really, really close to the problem they're solving. Now, keep in mind that neither of these categories is right or wrong. And in fact, you can think of these 2 categories as being stages of their own within this validation stage overall. So if you're starting out in category 1, make your way over to category 2 before moving on. Now, if you do fall into that first category where you don't necessarily have existing experience related to the app you're building yet, you need to validate the idea itself. For example, you may need to build a prototype to convey your idea when you're having conversations with people, or put up a landing page and drive traffic to it, etc. Now, before you move forward, you need to make sure people will actually want and need your app. You also need to gather insight on how they need your app. Now, if you fall into the second category, or if you've made your way there over from the first, where you have that industry experience related to the app you're building, and you understand in depth the problem that you're solving, you're likely already coming into this with a high level of validation. So you likely work, live, or interact with people on a daily basis who need to solve this problem, and you yourself may need to solve this problem, and it's likely something you've had lots of conversations about, including with people who could be potential users. Now, for many people in this category, you don't necessarily need to build a prototype and go through the same stages as the person without any existing knowledge or experience does. There's a good chance you already know the people who need the solution, and for the most part, you know what that solution should look like. So at this point, your focus is now on product validation. And that's going to take us into the next stage. Once you have the validation, it's time to start building the first version of your application itself. Now, we're in the no-code space. So before you can build this application, you need to choose a platform or a tech stack that's going to serve your needs and serve your future users' needs too. So before we go any further, I want to hand this over to Gaby to speak from a technical standpoint.
Right. So there are a growing number of options for platforms out there, and I want to walk you through 3 main factors to consider to help you navigate and ultimately make the right decision. The first is functionality. You need to find a platform that enables you to create the type of functionality your app will need. Now, this might sound obvious, but it can be a bit more complicated once you really get into it. You need to consider a number of different questions, like how will your data be managed? How will your different user types interact with that data? What level of customization do you need within each individual feature? How much control do you need over the design? Will you need to be working with APIs? Everyone's needs are different, so I want you to have these questions in mind. To make it simple, though, you really need to look at your level of customization and control needs on a spectrum. So we're talking about how much control you personally want to have over the app, how the app operates, and how it's built, as well as how much customization you need within the app. So on the left side, we have apps with very low levels of needed customizations and very low levels of control over not just what the app does, but how the app does those things. Some apps are incredibly simple. Some don't even really need to be built from scratch. Maybe you're just building a quick survey tool, for example, and all you need to do is customize the questions. That would fall on the left side over here. On the right side, however, we have apps with very high levels of customizations needed and very high levels of control from a founder's standpoint on what the app does and exactly how it does those things. Maybe you're creating a survey builder versus just creating a single survey, for example. With that in mind, I now want you to look at another spectrum. And on this one, we're now looking at different types of no-code app development platforms, and specifically the types of learning curves they might have, because as a non-technical entrepreneur, you need to know how much you're going to need to learn and understand going into this in order to set the right expectations. So on the spectrum you see here, on the left side, we have platforms with very low learning curves. These are platforms that will allow you to get your very own app up and running, potentially within a matter of hours. With these types of platforms, you're primarily working from templates where most of the work is already done for you. On the right side of the spectrum, we have no-code platforms with higher levels of learning curves. With these platforms, you can expect it to take longer to get a handle on how to create the types of complex customizations your app needs. Now, if we overlap these two spectrums, you'll see that for apps with low levels of customization and not much control needed over how specific functions are run, you can choose a no-code app development platform that is simple and has a low learning curve. But if you're going to need a high level of customization and a high level of control over how those customizations play out, you'll need to be looking at application development platforms that naturally have a higher learning curve. All that's to say is when it comes to making sure a platform can handle the functionality you need, look beyond just the features alone. Think about whether you need to dictate exactly what and how your app performs every process, and how much control over the customization do you want. Many people want to have a high level of customization and control so that they can build anything and everything they want. But they want to use a platform with an extremely low learning curve. And as you can see from these spectrums, however, those two things don't align. Now, that's not to say you can't build a customized application. You absolutely can because of the availability of no-code tools. But you need to set the right expectations in order to build the right app. And that's really what I want to get at here, because it throws a lot of people off track. If you know you want and need the customization and control, you have to expect it to require a higher investment from you in terms of the potential amount of work required. All right. The second thing I want you to think about are the types of integrations you might be needing for your app. What third-party services do you want or need? This will also help you choose which no-code platform you end up using. We like to teach entrepreneurs to not reinvent the wheel when it comes to the features their apps need. That means if you don't absolutely have to create a feature from scratch, you can simply integrate with a third-party service instead and save yourself a ton of time. And sometimes this can even mean integrating for the initial versions of your app and then replacing that integration with something custom down the road. But in order to do that, you have to make sure the platform you're using allows you to integrate with the services you need. And really, the ability to integrate gives you a wider range of app development platforms to potentially choose from, because if the platform you want to use doesn't handle a certain type of functionality you need on its own, for instance, you may just be able to integrate with an existing service instead. This would happen through the use of APIs, which allow your application to communicate with other services. This is a major asset. And if you anticipate needing to use any existing third-party services, make sure the no-code development platform you choose allows you to work with APIs, and that the service that you're using, you want to integrate with, has an API as well. Now, the last main thing I want you to consider is scalability. The question is, will your app be able to handle future scale? To help you answer that, you got to think about scalability in a couple ways. First, can your app grow its user base? And second, can your app grow and expand in terms of features and functionality? And can it do those things while still performing well? That's essentially what scalability means. Can you grow and still function and perform well? For some no-code platforms, you can't achieve that. Those are typically the ones on the left end of both of these spectrums we talked about. And in reality, any platforms you find that don't handle scale may not really be created for the type of scale you need in the first place. Again, every app is different, so you have to find the platform that suits your needs. However, for other platforms, you can certainly build a scalable app. For example, we prefer to use Bubble with our clients. It's an incredibly powerful platform, and if you're looking to scale your app into a reliable business, it's one you should absolutely consider using if you're not already. Our clients are using Bubble in both B2B and B2C settings and are able to consistently and reliably grow their user bases, their feature sets, and revenues, all while giving quality experiences. Now, Bubble does fall farther to the right side on the spectrums we talked about. It gives you a high level of customization and control. You can integrate with all kinds of outside services, and you can effectively scale your app if it's built and structured correctly. But you have to understand that with any platform that truly gives you a blank canvas that you have nearly 100% control over, there's going to be a higher learning curve involved. However, because of that high level of customization, the incredible amount of control you as a founder have over your app, and the scalability you can achieve with Bubble, it's incredibly worth it. So when you're choosing a platform to use for your no-code app, keep those things in mind. Okay, I'm gonna pass this back to Kristen now.
All right, so we're making a lot of progress here and we have covered a lot. This is where we start to get into the really fun stuff and actually bringing those ideas and solutions to life. So let's jump back to these stages to scaling your app-based business. So you have your app idea, AKA the solution to the problem you've identified. You have validation that people want and need that solution. And you found the no-code platform that serves your needs. And I should say, while we like to use Bubble at the hub or the base of our tech stack with clients, there are all types of other no-code tools that you can layer on top of that. Tools like Zapier or any of the countless third-party services we talked about integrating with, those all form the broader base you'll use depending on your own needs. So now it's time to fully enter the next stage of building version 1 of your app. Now, to be clear, a lot of people refer to this in a lot of different ways. You might hear this referred to as your MVP, or your minimum viable product, or your minimum marketable product, or even your minimum lovable product. But here's the thing to understand. Depending on your level of validation, your access to potential test users, and the demand, among other things, you may build more or less of a first version than someone else. For now, we're just going to call this your first version. And you can think of this as the core of your app that you intend to continue scaling from here on out, versus the thing you want to build as a quick litmus test to then go back and rebuild afterwards. So when you have validation that people need and want your solution, you now need to create the core product that'll solve the problem you've identified. You need to give people the app they need and want so they can start using it. But you don't just want to hack this together or wing it as you go. This is what a lot of entrepreneurs do, and it's understandable because they're new to the space, new to the processes and these stages, and new to the tools. So they kind of wing it along the way. But honestly, that typically leads to a lot of rebuilds or even failed launches down the road. So we don't want you to wing it. Instead of doing that, we like to follow a very specific process to build the first version of your app that will not only function in the way you need, but that is also prepared for reliable scale in the next stages with your business as a whole. So we want you to move forward from here and straight into your growth phases versus having to circle back and start over. So we follow this 3-step process. The first part of this is you need to make sure you're starting with the right underlying strategy. This is what everything else builds on top of, and it's unfortunately something that a lot of people skip over. To start creating your overarching strategy, you have to plan out how to do the right things at the right times and in the right order with the first version of your app. So for example, which features will you build and when? How can we make sure you're prioritizing the right layers of functionality for your particular target market and your particular app? And how can we make sure you don't end up launching too late? How can we make sure you're building certain features later in the process so that you don't actually accidentally muddy the user feedback you need in the immediate? And on top of that, which stages of testing will you enter along the way and when? In order to decide on this, we need to look at the overarching development and launch process from your own standpoint. How much initial validation do you have, for example? How robust of a first version are you building? Those answers will help dictate this. And taking it a step further, how will you prepare your app for its initial users, both from a marketing, technical, and usability standpoints? Does your messaging align with what you're creating? And does it also align with the problem you're solving and the outcome your app will be providing? And on top of that, are you able to convey that to users in a way that will set you up for success in your beta testing stages? These things all need to go into the overarching roadmap you create. Now, we unfortunately don't have time to create a complete roadmap today, but I want to give you one more additional piece of advice related to this that'll make your development, launch, and scale a whole lot easier. I want you to identify the very first problem you need to solve with your app. And I'm talking about the one big thing where if users could solve this, their lives and businesses would change instantly. And once you have that, identify the outcome users want to achieve on the other side of it. Now, I'm not talking about the features or the functionality they'd want to see in an app. For now, just think about the outcome they'd like to experience once that underlying problem is solved. So for example, maybe the problem is your target users have lost their jobs and they're having trouble finding new ones. So they're struggling to support themselves. And the outcome they want to achieve is having a stable income within the next few months so they can support their family. They want to get rid of that stress of searching for a job while they're simultaneously still having to pay their bills. We have the problem and we have the outcome outlined here. And now you need to place your app in between those. So in this example scenario, maybe your app would be some type of job board application. Essentially, your app needs to be the thing that solves the problem and enables the outcome. Now, here's the thing. Your app can solve a number of different problems and provide a number of different outcomes. And in fact, you might be having trouble narrowing it down to just one problem and outcome, and that is okay. But start with the main problem and outcome first, because if you can't solve the first major problem and provide the first major outcome, none of the rest matter. They are irrelevant. But once you have solved the first, then you can move on to the next, and so on. Now, this directly combats that build it all at once and wing it along the way approach that a lot of people end up diving into. Now, on top of your strategy, you have to layer on the structure of your app. And this is where we start to get a little bit more technical. We're looking at things like your database structure, the overall architecture of your app, the page structure or the global navigation, for example, and really the framework that everything else will build on top of. You can think of laying the foundation for a house, right? Pouring the cement so that you can build a long-lasting home on top of it. That's what you need to start with when it comes to your app too, because you want it to support all the future growth and scale. Now, on top of that structure, you have to start layering in what we call the systems of your app. So going back to our house analogy, imagine having that foundation laid and the framework of the house is all completed. And the next thing you have to do is add in things like wiring or the plumbing. But you wouldn't add these things in prior to the foundation and framework being built because they wouldn't be supported, right? It would not make sense. So imagine adding the plumbing and the wiring where if you flip a light switch on the wall by the door, then the entryway light comes on. Or if you push a button in the garage, then the garage door will open, and so on, right? Think of your app in the same way when it comes to the logic and the workflows that make it run. So start with that structure, then expand with an if this, then that approach as you start to layer more and more functionality into your app. Now, if you can do that, if you can create the structure and the systems you need, which will form the core of your app, you now have to focus on getting actionable feedback on that core or first version. And this takes us directly into our next stage of testing. Now, in reality, testing and getting feedback should be your most important goal at this point. And the testing you'll do will actually happen in a few different ways. So first, you'll need to go through your alpha testing stage. And this is essentially where you're making sure the product functions how it should. You're testing for pure functionality. Now, let me pass this over to Gaby again, and she's going to dive into this with you.
Right. So with your alpha testing, you need to do this in 2 ways or stages. First, you need to test from a developer's point of view, because after this stage, you'll be bringing in your initial live users on board, and you want to make sure you've stress tested the app first. You essentially want to poke as many holes in the app as you can so that you can make sure all the necessary functionality is in place as it should be. In doing this, you'll essentially start from the top down with your application. First, can your app create different user types successfully in the back end of your app? And when a user signs up, are they created in the database? And this applies to multiple user types as well. And then after that, can those users navigate the app effectively? Can they technically flow through the entire app and all of its processes as they should without getting stuck along the way due to a technical error? Beyond that, it's all about the data. Is the data stored and displayed properly? Does the front end reflect the back end? In other words, does the front end of your application properly connect to the back end so that the processes you've created are achieving their goals? And on top of that, can users manipulate and manage their data? They are created, they can navigate and create the data. Now, can they manage it? This is how you'll run your testing from a developer standpoint, and it can go on and on from there. After that, you'll want to test from a user's point of view and actually log in and navigate the app and all of the processes in full, just as they would. In fact, you'll want to have outside alpha users as well, because they'll navigate your app in unanticipated ways and even from devices you might not have tested with, which is invaluable.
Now, once you've gone through the alpha testing, you'll be moving into a beta testing phase. And this is where the testing gets really exciting because you're now bringing your users and your actual customers onto your app. This is where we really start testing for product validation. That essentially means that you want to make sure you have all the right features and functionality in place. And if they're not all correct, you want to get feedback on what to remove or what to add or iterate. Basically, at this stage, you should already know the app functions in the way that it should and that it technically solves the problem it's been created to solve. So with these initial beta users, you need to figure out how to solve the problem better or more conveniently or in more enjoyable ways. Can you improve the app's usability? And you can even start bringing in a revenue at this point if you're charging your beta users. Depending on the app and market, you may or may not be charging these initial users, But remember that ultimately you need to start getting feedback on how to improve the app for your users, because the more you do that, the faster you'll be able to move into the next stage. And that's where we reach the scaling of your app and your business. This is where you take the feedback you're getting and you start iterating the core first version you've already created. You start doing things like increasing your user base and refining pricing, or ultimately growing the company. But before we dive into this stage, I want to do a really quick recap. When you take your idea and you can narrow that idea down to solving a core problem, and when that core problem is something that a specific target market needs to solve, that they will pay to solve, and that potentially needs to be solved in a better way than it currently is, you're generating validation. Now, especially if you're coming into this with a lot of industry knowledge and experience, where you want to move quickly because you know the problem needs to be solved yesterday, you'll then move into product validation, or creating the first version of your app. You want to do this in a strategic and scalable way from a technical standpoint, because the last thing you want is to have to rebuild the app as soon as you start bringing users on board. And when you do bring users on board, you want to make sure the app is solving the problem it's been created to solve. And then you want to start solving it in better and better ways. And that brings us back to the scale stage. This is where you can actually go a few different routes, and we've had clients who have done each of these. At first, you can continue managing and growing the app on your own because it has been built on a no-code platform, and because you've built it, you can move at the speed you want, and you'll never have to be reliant on anyone else to grow and scale your app. You're in the driver's seat and you have full control. And you can also bring on a no-code development team of your own and shift your full focus toward the business side of things as CEO. But because you're the one who's built the app, you'll be able to effectively hire that team, train them on your app, and manage them, because you will know all the ins and outs, the lingo, etc. And this is a massive asset to have. And then lastly, you can bring on outside partners or even sell the app if you want. And you can now demonstrate not just an idea, but a scalable product that effectively solves a problem for your users. And again, we've had clients go down each of these routes depending on their own business and lifestyle goals. So there's no right or wrong way to go about it. But the important thing to understand is that by using no-code tools and following a process like this, you can actually create new opportunities for yourself that were previously dependent on highly skilled technical founders or co-founders. And depending on the route you go, this is a time to start doubling down on what's working, using the feedback that you're generating. You'll start refining your messaging, your marketing, and your sales. So right now, I encourage you to come up with a way to succinctly explain the core problem you're aiming to solve and the core outcome you're aiming to achieve. Having the ability to do this will help you immensely with your marketing and your sales as you scale the app and your business. And you'll likely narrow down your niche or market segment as well, or potentially even broaden. If you already started really narrow, by narrowing down, you're essentially changing your app from being a generalist to being a specialist. Or on the other hand, if you have a ton of success with a narrow market, you might then start to expand out instead. And you'll then continue expanding with new feature sets and even the design. And these additions will all go through that version 1 and those testing stages, just like your core app did. So really, you'll revisit these stages over time and continue growing and scaling from there. Now, we've covered a lot today, but on top of everything we've talked about, the really big thing to understand is that just because you're not coding doesn't mean you can't successfully launch and scale an app-based business. Go through these stages and set yourself up for success regardless of your background.
All right, everyone, that's where we're going to wrap it up. I hope that gives you a solid base to move forward from with your own no-code app and business. While we covered a lot today, there are obviously a ton of other factors we unfortunately can't fit into a single presentation. But if you'd like to join us for more, we do have a free 75-minute workshop that you can join at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop. But remember that we're all about focusing on the right things at the right time and in the right order. So to start here, make sure you have your bases covered and move forward from there.
Amazing. Thank you, Kristen and Gabby.
Thank you.
Super informative. People actually loved the slides. They literally asked around 10 times whether or not they can get a hold of them. So please make sure you do share them in the comments.
Absolutely.
And last but not least, please let us know, how can people find you to talk more about what you have presented? You mentioned the workshop. How do people get on it actually?
Yeah, sure. So if you head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop, you can sign up for it there. We're also on Facebook. We're on YouTube. You can reach out to us there as well.
Obviously, I think you're #1 no code team on YouTube. That's for sure. At least in my heart. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your time. You have been amazing as always, and we'll be talking to you very soon. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. You too.
Thank you.